Zala woke up before the sun, her hands already raw from the endless chores awaiting her. The small, crumbling house she lived in was never quiet, never peaceful. She had once known happiness back when her father was alive. But those days had faded like a distant dream. When her father passed away, leaving her and her mother alone, everything changed. Her mother remarried a man named Babu, and from that moment on, Zala's life became one of toil and suffering. Babu was a man of harsh words and even harsher hands. He viewed Zala as nothing more than an inconvenience, a burden he had been forced to take in. His own daughters, two lazy and spoiled girls, never lifted a finger. They lounged in the shade, their hands smooth and unstained, while Zala scrubbed the floors until her fingers bled. From dawn until dusk, she worked tirelessly, fetching water, preparing meals, and ensuring that every corner of the house was spotless. But no matter how hard she worked, it was never enough. The village women often whispered about Babu's cruelty. They saw how Zala was treated, how she walked with her head lowered, her body thin from lack of food. But no one dared to speak against Babu. He was a cunning man, always charming in public, always making sure that no one could interfere in what happened behind closed doors. He knew how to maintain his reputation, ensuring that Zala's suffering remained hidden from those who might care. Despite everything, Zala refused to let despair consume her. She found solace in the quiet moments, when the wind carried the scent of blooming flowers, or when she could steal a brief moment under the moonlight, whispering her dreams to the stars. She dreamed of a better life, of a future where she was free from Babu's control. She believed, deep in her heart, that fate had something greater in store for her. But as the days passed, Babu's greed only grew stronger. He resented Zala more and more, seeing her as nothing but an extra mouth to feed. And when an opportunity arose, one that could rid him of her and bring him wealth, he did not hesitate. Zala had no idea that her life was about to take a terrifying turn. Zala's fate was sealed with a handshake and a bag of gold. Babu had always been a greedy man, but never had he found such an easy way to rid himself of what he considered his greatest burden. When Lord Kamari arrived in the village, the air grew tense. He was a man of great wealth and mystery, draped in fine robes, his presence commanding respect and fear in equal measure. No one knew where he had come from, nor did anyone dare ask. The only certainty was that he had power, and power often demanded silence. Whispers spread quickly. Lord Kamari was searching for a bride. He did not want love, nor companionship, only a woman to bring to his grand estate. The villagers speculated why, but no one truly knew. Some said he had lost a wife before and needed another. Others believed darker rumors, ones that made them shudder when they spoke his name. Babu, blinded by his insatiable hunger for wealth, saw only an opportunity. He did not care for the fears of the villagers or the mysteries surrounding Lord Kamari. He saw gold, and gold was enough. Without hesitation, he offered Zala as a bride, boasting about her obedience and hard work as if she were livestock to be sold. Zala's heart pounded in her chest when she heard of the deal. She rushed to her mother, desperate for her help, but the poor woman could only weep. "I have no power to stop this," she sobbed, clutching Zala's hands. "Babu controls everything. I am as helpless as you." Tears streamed down Zala's face as Babu stood before her, his expression cold. "You should be grateful," he sneered. "You will live in wealth now. Do you think a man like Kamari would choose you if you were not lucky?" But Zala knew this was not luck. This was a prison disguised as a marriage. That night, she was dressed in the finest garments she had ever worn, though they felt heavy on her trembling body. She was placed in a grand carriage, her cries ignored, her pleas met with silence. Her mother stood at the doorway, her face streaked with sorrow, unable to defy her husband. The village women lowered their gazes, unwilling to meet Zala's eyes, for they knew the cruelty of fate but had no strength to challenge it. As the carriage rolled away, Zala clutched her hands into fists. She was being taken from everything she had ever known, forced into a life she had never chosen. She did not know what awaited her in Lord Kamari's estate, but deep down she feared that her struggles had only just begun. Zala stepped into Lord Kamari's mansion, her breath hitching as she took in her surroundings. The place was magnificent, adorned with golden chandeliers and marble floors, but something about it sent a shiver down her spine. The air was thick, almost suffocating, and though the halls were wide and the ceilings high, a sense of entrapment settled over her. The mansion sat at the edge of a dense, shadowy forest. The villagers had whispered about that place, warning of spirits that roamed under the moonlight. Now, as Zala stood in her new home, she couldn't shake the feeling that something unnatural lurked beyond the trees. The servants were eerily quiet, their footsteps barely making a sound. They bowed their heads when she passed, avoiding her gaze as if speaking to her might bring some unseen misfortune upon them. No one welcomed her, no one smiled, and the silence in the halls was thick enough to drown in. Her new husband was no different. Lord Kamari was an enigma, tall, poised, and draped in robes as dark as the night sky. His voice was deep and smooth, but his words were strange, laced with riddles that made no sense. He never stepped too close, never let the candlelight fully illuminate his face. His touch, when it did brush against her, was unnaturally cold, sending a chill down her spine. During the wedding feast Zala barely ate. She felt no hunger, only a gnawing unease. The guests were few, mostly men in dark cloaks who murmured amongst themselves. They cast glances at her, their eyes filled with something she couldn't decipher. Pity? Fear? She wasn't sure. As the night deepened, the unease within her grew. The servants scurried away, extinguishing most of the lamps, leaving the halls bathed in flickering shadows. When she was finally led to her new chamber, the silence was overwhelming. She waited and waited, but her husband did not come. When she stepped out of the room, candle in hand, she found the hallway deserted. A cold wind brushed past her, though the windows were shut. She turned a corner and stopped in her tracks. There in the dim corridor was Lord Kamari. He stood motionless, his back to her, his figure unnervingly still. Zala's breath caught in her throat. "Husband?" she called hesitantly. Slowly he turned. But the moment the candlelight flickered over his face, the flame shuddered violently, as if recoiling. Zala stumbled back, her heart pounding. There was something wrong. Something deeply wrong. She had been sold into marriage, but now she feared she was trapped in something far worse. Zala lay awake in her grand but cold chamber, staring at the flickering lantern by her bedside. Sleep eluded her. The mansion, though beautiful, felt more like a prison, its walls whispering secrets she couldn't yet understand. Then she heard it, hushed voices outside her door. She sat up, straining to listen. "Did you hear?" Another one before her, one servant murmured. "She should never go near that room," another voice replied, fear lacing their tone. Zala's breath hitched. "That room?" The voices faded as the servants scurried away, but the seed of curiosity had been planted. She had explored much of the mansion since her arrival, but there was one door that always remained locked. She had assumed it led to storage or an unused wing of the house. But now it was clear, it held a secret. The warning gnawed at her, but so did her need to know the truth. Determined, she waited until the halls were silent, until the candles had burned low and the night was at its deepest. With careful steps, she slipped out of her chamber, moving like a shadow through the corridors. She reached the forbidden door. It was old, its wooden frame carved with strange symbols she had never seen before. Her fingers traced the markings, a chill running through her. She needed the key. 4 days she observed the servants, watched where they went and what they carried. Finally she saw it, a small rusted key hanging from the head servant's belt. That night she slipped into the kitchen, where the servants rested after a long day's work. Quiet as a whisper, she plucked the key from its loop and disappeared into the darkness. Now, standing before the forbidden door once more, she hesitated only for a moment before sliding the key into the lock. With a soft click, the door creaked open. A gust of ice-cold air rushed out, wrapping around her like unseen fingers. She shuddered but stepped inside. The room was dimly lit by a single lantern on the far wall. The scent of old wood and something faintly metallic filled the air. Her eyes adjusted and her breath caught in her throat. The walls were lined with portraits, rows upon rows of young women. Each face was strikingly beautiful, their eyes hauntingly sad. Some gazed directly ahead, others looked away, their expressions frozen in grief. Zala's pulse quickened. Who were these women? Her gaze moved to the center of the room. There stood an enormous mirror, its frame carved with symbols similar to those on the door. The glass shimmered, almost as if it were breathing. Then a voice, soft, familiar, whispered her name. Zala gasped, stumbling back. The mirror's surface rippled like water, and in its depths she saw something that made her blood run cold. The women from the portraits, their sorrowful eyes now filled with silent pleas. And then, among them, she saw herself. Zala's breath came in short, sharp gasps as the mirror's surface rippled like water. The women's faces shifted, their sorrowful eyes pleading, their mouths forming silent words she couldn't hear. Then, like a terrible wave crashing over her, the visions began. She saw them, each bride before her, taken in by Lord Kamari's charm and wealth, only to meet a fate worse than death. The visions played out before her like a nightmare she couldn't wake from. One by one, the women stepped into the mansion, their faces full of hope. Then darkness swallowed them. Their smiles faded into terror. Their voices turned into screams that no one could hear. Their bodies disappeared, but their souls remained, trapped within the mansion's walls, within the cursed mirror. Zala's stomach churned. Lord Kamari was no man. He was a cursed creature, feeding on the life force of his brides to sustain his unnatural existence. That was why the mansion felt so heavy, why the servants whispered and avoided her gaze. They knew. They had always known. And now she was next. A chilling breath ghosted against the back of her neck. Zala froze. A deep, velvety voice rumbled behind her. "You have seen too much, my dear." Her blood ran cold. She turned slowly, dread clawing up her spine. Lord Kamari stood there, his regal posture unchanged, but his eyes glowed red like embers in the dark. His handsome face twisted into something unnatural, his features shifting like a mask barely holding back a monstrous truth. Zala stumbled backward, but the room felt smaller now, the air thick and suffocating. The mirrors still pulsed, the trapped brides watching helplessly. "I was going to wait," Kamari sighed, his voice almost regretful. "You seemed different. But curiosity is a dangerous thing." Zala's mind raced. If she didn't act now, she would never leave this place alive. But how could she fight something not entirely human? The mirror shimmered again, and for the first time, the trapped brides' voices broke through. "The key." Zala's eyes darted back to the mirror. At its base, barely visible, lay an ancient dagger, its blade black as night, its hilt covered in the same strange symbols that adorned the door. Kamari's gaze followed hers, and for the first time, something flickered in his eyes. Fear. Zala lunged. Her fingers closed around the dagger, and the moment she touched it, the air around her crackled with energy. Kamari's calm demeanor shattered. His lips curled in a snarl, his form distorting, shadows writhing around him like living creatures. "You cannot win," he growled. Zala gripped the dagger tighter. She didn't need to win. She just needed to escape. Zala's heartbeat pounded in her ears as she bolted from the forbidden chamber, the dagger clutched tightly in her trembling hands. The mansion groaned around her, its walls twisting and shifting as if alive, reshaping to trap her within its cursed embrace. The once grand corridors stretched unnaturally, doors vanishing before she could reach them. The chandeliers flickered, casting eerie shadows that slithered along the walls. She wasn't just running from Lord Kamari. The entire mansion was against her. A figure appeared in her path, a servant. Zala's eyes widened with hope. "Please help me," she begged. "You know the truth. You know what he is." The woman lowered her gaze, trembling. "I cannot." Others emerged from the darkness, maids, butlers, cooks. Their faces were lined with fear, their lips pressed into thin, sorrowful lines. They would not defy their master. Zala took a shaky step back. "He's trapped you too, hasn't he?" No one answered. Then, a voice as cold as death echoed behind her. "You misunderstand, my dear." Lord Kamari emerged from the shadows, his figure unnervingly calm. His crimson eyes gleamed with quiet amusement. "They do not serve me out of fear. They serve me because they have no choice." He stepped closer, and the air around Zala grew heavy, her limbs sluggish as if unseen hands were pressing down on her. She gritted her teeth. "I will never belong to you." A low chuckle rumbled from Kamari's chest. "You already do." Desperation surged through her veins. She needed a plan. She needed to think. Then she remembered. The folk tale. An old story whispered among village elders, about a cursed being bound to a place, a soul tethered to darkness. To break the curse, one had to find its source. Zala's eyes darted around. The mansion was Kamari's prison, but where had it all begun? Her mind raced. The locked chamber held the memories of past brides. The mirror contained their souls. But neither had been the beginning. The heart of the mansion. The place where the curse was first cast. Kamari's smug expression wavered as he saw the shift in her eyes. "What are you thinking?" he asked, his voice dangerously smooth. Zala turned and ran. This time she wasn't just fleeing. She was searching. Doors slammed shut behind her, paintings on the walls twisted into grotesque shapes, whispering threats and voices not her own. Shadows clawed at her feet. Still she ran. Then, a grand staircase spiraled downward, deeper than the mansion should have allowed. The air was different here, thick with something ancient. Zala knew. This was it. The heart of the mansion. The place where the darkness had been born. Zala's breath came in ragged gasps as she descended the spiraling staircase, the oppressive darkness pressing in around her. The air smelled of damp stone and something old, something rotten. She didn't know how much longer she could run. The mansion twisted at Kamari's will, a labyrinth of nightmares designed to keep her trapped forever. Then suddenly, a hand seized her wrist. She gasped, ready to fight, but a low voice whispered, "Quiet. If you want to survive, don't scream." Zala froze. The figure before her was cloaked in deep blue, his hood shadowing his face. But his grip was strong, steady. Not like Kamari's unnatural coldness. This was human warmth. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The stranger slowly removed his hood. His sharp eyes gleamed like molten gold in the dim light. A scar traced his cheek, a sign of past battles. "My name is Malik," he said. "And I've been hunting Lord Kamari for years." Zala's pulse quickened. "You know what he is?" Malik nodded. "More than you do." He glanced around, his hand still firm on hers as if anchoring her to reality. "This mansion is his prison, but it is also his weapon. It feeds on fear, on hopelessness. That's why he lures young brides here. He needs their souls to keep himself alive." Zala swallowed hard. "I saw them. The women in the portraits. He took them all." "Yes," Malik said grimly. "But you're different. You found the heart of the mansion. That means you have a chance to break the curse." Zala shook her head. "I don't understand. How can I stop him?" Malik reached into his cloak and pulled out a small, glowing amulet. The light pulsed softly, a warmth that pushed back the cold if only a little. "This," he said, pressing it into her palm, "is the key." The amulet sent a strange, tingling sensation through her skin. It felt alive. "Kamari's power is tied to this place," Malik continued. "And deep beneath the mansion, hidden in its very foundation, is the source of his immortality." Zala's grip tightened around the amulet. "The heart of the mansion." Malik nodded. "Destroy it and he will fall. But you have only one chance. If you fail, he will never let you go." A shiver ran down Zala's spine. The weight of fate pressed heavily on her shoulders. She had spent her life being powerless, a victim of others' cruelty. But now she had a choice. "I'll do it," she whispered, resolve burning in her chest. Malik gave a firm nod. "Then we don't have much time. He knows you're close." A distant, bone-chilling roar echoed through the mansion, shaking the walls. Kamari had sensed her defiance. The final battle was about to begin. Zala stepped into the forbidden room, her heart pounding like a war drum. The air crackled with dark energy, shadows slithering along the walls like living things. In the center of the room, Lord Kamari stood waiting, his tall figure shrouded in darkness. His crimson eyes burned like embers, filled with ancient sorrow and unfathomable hunger. "You should not have come here, my bride," he said, his voice smooth yet chilling. "But it seems fate has led you to me." Zala clutched the sacred amulet, feeling its warmth push back the suffocating cold that surrounded her. Behind her, she could sense the spirits of the past brides, their whispers swirling in the air like a solemn hymn. They were watching, waiting for her to do what they could not. Kamari took a slow step forward. "You have seen the truth. I was once a king, beloved and feared. But my greed, my desire for eternal power led to my downfall." He gestured around the room. "The spirits cursed me to this fate, to exist between life and death, bound to this mansion until the end of time." His expression softened as he gazed at her. "But you, Zala, you are different. You are strong, clever, and fearless. You could rule by my side. Together we could reclaim the power I lost." Zala shuddered as his voice wove a web of temptation around her. He extended a pale, clawed hand. "Join me and you will never suffer again. Wealth, power, immortality, all of it will be yours." For a fleeting moment, doubt crept into Zala's heart. A life of comfort, no more pain, no more servitude. Wasn't that what she had always longed for? Then the whispers of the lost brides grew louder. She saw their faces reflected in the cursed mirror, their sorrowful eyes pleading with her. They had once stood in her place, once been offered the same lies. Zala tightened her grip on the amulet. She would not be another name on the wall. "No," she said, her voice steady. "I will not be like you. I will not let this curse continue." Kamari's expression twisted into rage. "Foolish girl," he hissed. "If you will not join me, then you will perish like the rest." The room darkened as the shadows lunged toward her, twisting into monstrous forms. The ground trembled as the mansion itself resisted her defiance. Zala raised the amulet high, its golden light piercing through the darkness. The spirits of the lost bride surged forward, their whispers turning into a triumphant cry. "This ends now," she declared. With all her strength she hurled the amulet toward the ancient mirror, the heart of the mansion's curse. The moment it shattered, a blinding light erupted, drowning Kamari's furious scream. The curse was breaking. But was it enough to destroy him forever? As the mirror shattered, a brilliant explosion of golden light engulfed the forbidden room. The dark shadows that had once slithered across the walls recoiled in agony, writhing like dying serpents. The mansion trembled violently, its very foundation groaning as if centuries of evil were unraveling at once. Lord Kamari let out a blood-curdling scream, his once handsome form twisting into something monstrous. His elegant robes tattered, revealing decayed flesh and hollowed eyes that burned with fury. The spirits of the lost bride surrounded him, their sorrow now replaced with righteous vengeance. "No. This cannot be," Kamari roared, clawing at the air as the spirits closed in. Zala watched, her breath caught in her throat as the spirits of the betrayed brides finally took what was rightfully theirs. They encircled Kamari, their ethereal hands pulling him into the abyss from which he could never return. His screams echoed through the collapsing mansion until, at last, there was silence. It was over. The mansion began to crumble, the cursed energy that had kept it standing now dissipating. Chunks of the ceiling crashed down, the walls splitting apart. "Zala, we must go." Malik's voice rang out as he grabbed her hand, pulling her away from the wreckage. They sprinted through the mansion's twisting hallways, dodging falling debris and leaping over widening cracks in the floor. With a final desperate lunge, they burst through the front doors just as the entire structure caved in behind them. A deafening crash echoed through the forest, and when the dust settled, nothing remained but ruins. Zala collapsed onto the ground, her chest heaving. She had done it. The curse was broken. The lost brides were free. But justice was not yet complete. Back in the village, news of Zala's survival spread like wildfire. The villagers, once silent bystanders, now turned their judgmental gazes toward Babu. They had always known of his greed, but to sell his own stepdaughter to such a fate? It was unforgivable. That night, as Babu sat counting his ill-gotten gold, an unnatural wind swept through his home. The candle flames flickered wildly and a deep, whispering voice filled the air, the voices of the spirits. "You traded blood for gold," they murmured. "Now you shall reap what you have sown." Babu screamed as his riches turned to dust in his hands. His once proud home rotted before his eyes, the wooden beams creaking as unseen forces tore through them. The spirits had passed their judgment. By morning Babu was gone. Some say he fled in disgrace, unable to face his fate. Others whispered that the spirits had taken him, just as they had taken Kamari. As for Zala, she stood tall, no longer the girl who had been sold like an object. She had defied fate, shattered an ancient evil and proven that no one, not even the wicked, could escape justice. With the weight of the past finally lifted, Zala stood at the edge of the village, gazing at the vast horizon before her. For the first time in her life she was free. Free from her stepfather's cruelty, free from the grasp of a cursed monster, and free from the expectations of others. Malik stood beside her, his dark eyes filled with quiet admiration. "You are stronger than anyone I've ever known," he said. "The world will know your name, Zala." She smiled, but there was no longing in her heart, no desire to cling to the warrior who had helped her escape. He had played his part in her journey, but she had fought her own battles. And she would continue to do so, on her own terms. "I thank you, Malik," she said sincerely. "But my path is my own to walk." The village, once indifferent to her suffering, now stood before her with remorseful eyes. The elders, the women who had whispered behind closed doors, the men who had turned away, they all saw her now as something more. Not a helpless girl, but a force of resilience, a woman who had conquered what no one else had dared to face. An elder stepped forward. "Zala, we have wronged you. We ignored your pain and for that we are ashamed. Stay with us. Let us make amends." But Zala knew she was not meant to stay in the place that had once abandoned her. She had been shaped by struggle, tested by the spirits, and had emerged stronger than anyone had ever expected. She shook her head. "This village will always be a part of my past, but it is not my future." And with that, she turned away from the life she had once known, stepping into the unknown with nothing but her courage and the lessons she had learned. As she traveled, her story spread. Villages whispered of the girl who had faced a cursed lord and lived to tell the tale. Women who had been silenced found strength in her name. Those who had suffered at the hands of the cruel and powerful dared to rise, believing that they too could shape their own destiny. Zala did not seek wealth or titles, nor did she long for revenge or recognition. She sought justice not just for herself, but for others who had been cast aside, forgotten, and mistreated. Her name became a legend, spoken by storytellers around crackling fires. They called her the girl who defied darkness, the one who had chosen her own fate. And somewhere in the quiet whispers of the wind, the spirits watched over her, knowing that their blessing had been placed in the right hands. Zala's journey was not just about survival, it was about transformation. She had been given many chances to surrender, to accept the fate others had forced upon her, but she had refused. Each step she took, each decision she made, shaped her destiny. Her story became a legend, passed down from generation to generation. Elders told it to their grandchildren, not just as a tale of adventure, but as a lesson in resilience. They spoke of the girl who had been sold like property, yet rose above her circumstances. Of the young woman who faced a monster and emerged stronger than ever. Of the warrior who did not wield a sword, but the power of her own will. The lesson was clear: fate is not something written in stone. It is not dictated by birth, nor by the cruel hands of others. It is shaped by the choices we make, by the strength we find within ourselves when the world tries to break us. Zala's stepfather, Babu, had believed that greed would bring him fortune, but in the end, it was his own downfall. Lord Kamari had believed that power could trap love, but he had been destroyed by his own curse. Those who sought to control others always met ruin, while those who stood for justice found true strength. And what of the spirits? They had watched, as they always did, ensuring that balance was restored. They did not interfere, but they guided those who walked the path of righteousness. They whispered to those who needed courage, granting strength to the weary and wisdom to the lost. Zala had been given a choice: to remain a victim of her circumstances or to rise above them. And she had chosen the latter, proving that true power does not lie in wealth, in strength, or even in magic. True power lies in knowing your worth, in refusing to let others dictate your path. She was never meant to be a bride to darkness. She was never meant to be trapped in a life of servitude. From the very beginning she was meant to be a beacon of light, a symbol of defiance against oppression, a reminder that even in the face of despair, hope will always find a way. And so, the final message of Zala's tale echoed through time. No matter how dark the road may seem, no matter how many seek to break your spirit, never forget who you are. Your choices define your destiny. Your strength shapes your future. And no one, not a stepfather, not a king, not even fate itself, can take that power away from you.